right now, and this is literally just moving across the wires, Ian. So I don't have a ton of information, but the wires read, Trump signed an executive order increasing tariff on Canada from 25% to 35%, with higher tariffs set to go into effect on August 1st, which is 5 hours from now.
What happens when North America's closest friendship suddenly turns into open economic war? And what if the country America always mocked as too polite to fight delivers the most devastating counterstrike in modern history? This isn't some distant crisis. It's happening right now across the world's longest peaceful border. Your morning coffee just became 40% more expensive. US factories are suffocating without Canadian parts, and Wall Street is calling it the most dangerous trade war in decades. America believed it could bully its neighbor into submission, but Canada's silence became its deadliest weapon, and the response is so calculated, so precise, that economists warn it could permanently reshape global power. Stay with us, because this is the story of a single midnight signature that didn't just raise tariffs, it lit the fuse on an economic war that may destroy the very foundation of North America's prosperity. The midnight signature that changed everything. August 1st, 2025 will not be remembered as just another date in a trade calendar. It will go down as the night America lit a fire it could not control. At exactly midnight, President Trump's pen sliced across a document that raised tariffs on Canadian goods from 25% to a crushing 35%.
Basically, an executive order increasing the tariff on Canada from 25% to 35%, with this higher tariff set to go into effect on August 1st, 2025.
For Washington insiders, this was business as usual. Just another display of American muscle against what they thought was a weaker neighbor. Inside the White House, the mood was celebratory. Trump's advisors cheered what they believed was a masterstroke of negotiation. They laughed, confident that Canada would buckle within weeks, crawling back to restore its access to American markets. The arrogance was palpable. But in Ottawa, there was no panic, no shouting, no fiery speeches. Instead, there was silence, a cold, calculated silence. While America slept, Canada was wide awake, activating plans that had been quietly built for years. This wasn't an emotional reaction, it was a strategy. Within 72 hours, the consequences were visible. Families walking into Walmart found their $6.98 hoodies suddenly priced at $10.98. Coffee prices soared nearly 40%. American families planning simple weekend trips to Toronto or Montreal suddenly faced bills so high they had to cancel. And in Florida, where millions of Canadians spend winters, hotels and restaurants braced for disaster as bookings evaporated overnight. That midnight stroke of a pen didn't just change trade policy, it detonated a financial bomb. And America had no idea how much shrapnel was about to hit its own people. The silence that should have terrified Washington. Washington expected outrage. They expected angry speeches, dramatic press conferences, maybe even Canadian officials begging for relief. But none of that came. Instead, Canada responded with something far more dangerous: absolute silence. That silence wasn't a weakness. It was the sound of gears turning, of a nation executing a strategy prepared long before Trump ever signed his midnight order. Ottawa didn't waste time with theatrics. While American politicians boasted on TV, Canadian officials were already on the phone with Europe, Asia, and Latin America, strengthening trade routes that bypassed the US entirely. The most unnerving part? Ordinary Canadians didn't panic. Instead, they rallied together. Supermarkets promoted Canadian-grown produce. Shoppers proudly chose local brands. Provinces pushed Buy Canadian campaigns that swept across the country like wildfire. This wasn't anger, it was unity, and it turned every Canadian household into a soldier in a quiet economic war. Meanwhile, the first cracks in America's confidence began to show. Mayors in border towns panicked as Canadian tourism evaporated overnight. Florida, which depends on over 3 million Canadian visitors a year, watched hotel bookings collapse. Michigan auto plants, tied to Canadian supply chains, faced sudden shortages. Local economies built on cross-border flow began to choke. Yet in Washington, the arrogance continued. Trump's inner circle laughed at the idea of Canada fighting back, blind to the fact that the counterstrike was already in motion. What America mistook for passivity was, in reality, the calm before the storm. And the man leading that storm was someone Trump never should have underestimated: the economist who outplayed the dealmaker. While Trump pounded his chest over tariffs, Canada quietly unleashed a strategist unlike any America had faced before. His name, Mark Carney. To Trump, he was just another politician. To the world, he was a financial heavyweight with a track record of steering nations through crises. Carney wasn't a career politician chasing applause. He was a cold, calculating economist, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England, the man who guided Britain through the chaos of Brexit, the man who helped stabilize the global system during the 2008 financial crash. Now, as Prime Minister, he wasn't just leading Canada, he was orchestrating a counterattack built on math, markets, and patience. Trump was playing checkers, making loud moves designed for headlines. Carney was playing chess, seeing 5 steps ahead. He knew America's weakness wasn't pride or politics, it was dependence. The US needed Canada's resources, Canada's energy, Canada's minerals, more than Canada needed cheap access to Walmart shelves. And he intended to prove it. Within months, Canada slashed its reliance on American markets faster than anyone thought possible. Exports once destined for the US were rerouted to Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Gold shipments to the UK skyrocketed nearly 500%. New deals were signed with Japan, Mexico, and Australia. While Trump boasted of punishing his neighbor, Carney was quietly building new lifelines that made America irrelevant. This wasn't about retaliation anymore. It was about rewriting the balance of power. And Carney was about to reveal Canada's hidden weapon, one that struck at the very heart of America's technological and military future. Canada's secret weapon, the minerals America can't live without. For decades, Americans joked about Canada as the land of maple syrup, lumber, and hockey. But behind that polite image lies a treasure chest more valuable than oil, more powerful than gold: critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earth elements. These aren't optional materials. They're the lifeblood of the 21st century. Every smartphone, every laptop, every electric car battery, every wind turbine, every fighter jet, they all depend on these elements. And there are only 2 reliable sources in the world: authoritarian China or democratic Canada. Trump's tariffs might have been aimed at lumber and dairy, but Carney flipped the script. While Washington was busy celebrating its victory, Canada accelerated mining approvals, expanded processing plants, and signed exclusive deals with allies desperate for non-Chinese supply chains. Canada wasn't just shipping raw ore anymore, it was refining and delivering ready-to-use materials that bypassed Beijing entirely. The Pentagon, already spending $500 million to reduce dependence on China, suddenly realized the truth. Their entire strategy relied on Canadian cooperation. Without Canada's rare earths, America couldn't build F-35 fighter jets. Without Canadian cobalt, electric vehicle production stalled. Without lithium from the north, the Green Revolution was dead before it started. And yet, with one midnight stroke of a pen, Trump had slapped crushing tariffs on the very ally America needed most. It was more than a blunder. It was a strategic catastrophe. Canada wasn't begging for access anymore. It was holding the keys to America's future. And suddenly, the polite neighbor looked less like a partner and more like a gatekeeper. The politeness offensive that crushed Main Street America. If Washington expected rage from Canadians, what they got instead was something far more dangerous: unity wrapped in politeness. No protests, no boycotts, no fiery speeches about America. Instead, Canada turned inward with a quiet determination that cut deeper than any angry retaliation ever could. Ontario Premier Doug Ford launched 5/8 of the Buy Ontario, Buy Canada campaign, a movement that swept through every supermarket, clothing store, and online checkout. Families proudly chose Canadian-made goods. Small businesses advertised with maple leaf logos like badges of honor. Every dollar spent at home became a silent weapon against Trump's tariffs, and it worked. While Canada's economy adjusted with remarkable calm, American families began to feel the squeeze. Car prices jumped by as much as 8% overnight. Shoes soared 40%. Clothing spiked nearly 38%. Even Walmart, built on the promise of always low prices, warned that shelves could no longer stay cheap. Suddenly, the tariff war wasn't abstract. It was hitting wallets on Main Street. Ford Motor Company bled billions covering rising costs. Procter & Gamble, after months of absorbing losses, raised prices on essentials like soap, toothpaste, and shampoo. Middle-class American families already stretched thin found themselves forced to cut back on the very basics of daily life. The irony was bitter. Trump claimed he was punishing Canada, but the reality was unavoidable. American workers, American households, and American towns were paying the price. And while U.S. families struggled to afford toothpaste, another nation was quietly stepping into the vacuum Trump had created. A rival that wasted no time turning America's blunder into its own advantage. How China cashed in on America's mistake. As Trump slammed doors on Canada, he cracked one wide open for America's fiercest rival, China. In a move that stunned even his closest advisors, Trump agreed to a 90-day tariff truce with Beijing, the same China the Pentagon calls the greatest strategic threat of the century. The timing was a gift. While Canada, America's closest ally, faced crushing tariffs, China got breathing room to expand its global reach. Beijing wasted no time. They accelerated trade deals across Africa, offering zero-tariff access to dozens of nations. They deepened ties with Latin America, locking in new mineral and energy contracts. And they used every moment of that truce to tighten their grip on global supply chains. The contradiction was staggering. America was punishing the one democratic country capable of freeing it from China's dominance in critical minerals, while giving China itself the space to regroup and expand. Washington was too blinded by pride to see that it was empowering the very adversary it feared most, and Beijing played it masterfully. While Trump boasted about toughness, Chinese diplomats quietly reassured partners that they were the stable choice. Investors noticed. By the end of the truce, Chinese trade with Africa had surged, while American influence shrank. In trying to break Canada, Trump had weakened America's position and strengthened China's. The irony could not have been sharper. The world's most polite nation was treated like an enemy, while its greatest rival walked away stronger than ever. And Canada? It wasn't panicking. It was preparing its next move, one that would hit America at the very foundation of its power. The checkmate nobody saw coming. What began as a tariff dispute was no longer about trade. It was about survival. America thought Canada would fold under pressure, but instead, Ottawa rewrote the rules of economic warfare. The U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, once the backbone of nearly $1 trillion in yearly trade, now hung by a thread. Trump's tariffs had ripped holes in the very framework that kept North America's supply chains alive. But instead of panicking, Canada adapted with shocking speed. Its banking system, among the world's most stable, held firm. Its resource base, rich in minerals the future depends on, became more valuable with every passing day. Meanwhile, the U.S. felt the pain where it hurt most at home. Aluminum for beer cans? Canadian. Electricity powering factories across the northern states? Canadian. Auto parts keeping Detroit's assembly lines running? Canadian. The more America pushed, the more it realized the neighbor it mocked as dependent was actually holding the cards. Political pressure exploded in states like Michigan and New York as factories slowed, jobs disappeared, and shelves grew more expensive. What Trump called strength now looked like self-destruction, and Canada, calm and patient, had just forced America into a corner. The price of pride on America's kitchen table. For most Americans, trade wars had always felt distant, something fought in boardrooms and stock markets. But now the battlefield was the kitchen table. Grocery bills soared. A pound of beef cost more than some families could spare. Orange juice, once a breakfast staple, became a luxury item. Even a simple cup of coffee carried the weight of Trump's midnight decision. And the pain wasn't temporary. Economists warned these weren't market jitters. They were structural changes. Canada had already signed long-term contracts with Europe and Asia, locking in exports that once flowed south. Those supply lines wouldn't simply snap back when Washington came knocking. Ordinary families began to ask the questions politicians avoided. Why was toothpaste suddenly priced like perfume? Why were vacations canceled? Why were American jobs vanishing while Canadian exports found new homes overseas? For decades, Americans believed their neighbor needed them more than they needed Canada. Now that illusion was shattered. Canada was thriving with new partners, while America struggled under the weight of its own pride. Trump promised voters toughness. What they got was empty shelves, shrinking paychecks, and a brutal truth. His war wasn't hurting Ottawa, it was breaking Main Street USA. How Canada rebuilt the global economic map. While Washington staggered under the weight of its own tariffs, Ottawa was busy redrawing the world's economic map. What looked like retaliation at first was, in reality, a full-scale realignment of trade power. Between mid-2024 and mid-2025, Canada slashed its dependence on U.S. markets by 10%, an achievement economists once called impossible. But the real brilliance wasn't in cutting ties. It was in building stronger ones elsewhere. Gold exports to the United Kingdom skyrocketed nearly 500%. Deals with the European Union locked in long-term mineral supplies. Japan, Mexico, and Australia stepped forward, eager to partner with a democratic supplier of critical resources outside China's shadow. These weren't quick fixes. They were multi-year contracts, with clauses ensuring growth and expansion. By the time Americans realized what had happened, Canada had already shifted entire industries eastward and westward, bypassing the southern border completely. For the first time in modern history, Canada wasn't just a junior partner in North America. It was a global player shaping the future of supply chains. And as new alliances solidified, one truth became undeniable. America's loss wasn't temporary. It was permanent. Canada had moved on. For more than a century, the US and Canada were bound by something deeper than trade agreements. They fought together in wars, defended each other in crises, and built the world's largest shared border without walls or soldiers. But Trump's tariff war cracked that foundation in ways that could not be repaired with a handshake. Canadians felt betrayed. To them, the tariffs weren't just economic blows, they were insults. After decades of loyalty, Ottawa was treated like a rival, while Beijing was courted as a partner. Opinion polls revealed a dramatic shift. For the first time in modern history, more Canadians trusted Europe and Asia than their southern neighbor. On the American side, political leaders scrambled to contain the fallout. Governors from border states warned Washington that trust was evaporating, and once lost, it might never return. Business owners who relied on Canadian suppliers found themselves locked out of deals that had existed for generations. What Trump saw as short-term leverage had become a long-term fracture. The world's closest friendship was now riddled with suspicion. And as Canada forged ahead with new alliances, America was left with the sinking realization that it had pushed its most reliable partner away. At first, Wall Street dismissed the tariffs as political theater, but by the second quarter, the numbers told a different story. Stock prices for automakers collapsed as supply chains jammed. Aluminum futures spiked. Food companies warned of double-digit price hikes. Investors who once saw Canada as America's safe backyard suddenly viewed it as an independent powerhouse. Canadian bonds climbed while U.S. markets trembled. Hedge funds quietly shifted money north, betting Ottawa would outlast Washington. For Wall Street, the danger wasn't just higher costs, it was the loss of predictability. The U.S.-Canada relationship had always been the bedrock of stability. Now, every earnings call carried the same warning: uncertainty. By the time traders realized the damage, it was too late. Canada had secured new partners, and America's financial markets were left to absorb the shock of their leaders' gamble. By the end of Trump's trade war with Canada, one truth stood tall. This wasn't just about tariffs, it was about the collapse of a relationship that had once defined North American strength. What began as a flex of power had spiraled into a global realignment that left America weaker, poorer, and increasingly isolated. Canada, once dismissed as dependent, had emerged as a global force. Its critical minerals powered new industries across Europe and Asia. Its banking stability attracted investors fleeing American uncertainty. And its reputation for reliability made it the partner the world wanted, at the very moment Washington pushed it away. For Americans, the fallout was personal. Families faced higher grocery bills. Workers lost jobs as factories slowed. Communities that once thrived on cross-border trade felt abandoned by policies made thousands of miles away. The kitchen table had become the front line of an economic war they never asked for. The tragedy was not just economic, it was strategic. By turning on its closest ally, America handed opportunities to China, fractured trust with its neighbor, and damaged its own credibility worldwide. Pride had replaced pragmatism, and the cost was historic. But history is not finished. America can still choose partnership over rivalry, humility over arrogance, and rebuilding over isolation. The question is whether its leaders and its people will recognize that before the damage becomes permanent. The choice is ours. The story of North America is still being written. Will it be one of division and decline or renewal and strength? That answer depends not on politicians, but on us. So ask yourself, will we allow pride to dictate the future, or demand leaders who rebuild trust before it's too late? If this story made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold truths the world needs to hear.